Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a video talking to you about this optic I have here on my Midwest Industries rifle, and that is the primary arms 1-6 with the ACSS Raptor reticle for 5.56. You've seen this on this Midwest Industries rifle for probably a few months now if you've been following my channel. However, at this point, after the experience I've had with it, I feel like I have the adequate information to give you a review. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to go ahead and just put my full disclosure information out there and put out that I did not pay for this optic. This was provided at no cost by Dimitri over at Primary Arms for me to be able to do the review. However, as you know, if you've been following my channel, I have paid for many Primary Arms optics in the past and would happily do so again, and may actually be here in the near future, but we'll see about that. But I am a big fan of Primary Arms, but I did not pay for this one specifically, just so you are aware. Also, it's probably worth mentioning that it's currently housed in a Midwest Industries mount, which I also didn't pay for, but I really like these mounts as well. So, with that being out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the features of this. It's going to be very similar externally to the other 1-6s that I've talked about from Primary Arms. We have our illumination knob here on the left side of the optic. Goes all the way up to 11, so should be pretty dang bright then, but we'll talk more about that later. We have our capped elevation and windage knobs here on the top and on the side. And on the windage knob, we once again have a storage compartment for an extra battery in case you're like me and you leave your optics on when you're not supposed to. We have back here at the front part of the bell our magnification adjustment, going again from 1 to 6. Is it a true 1 power? Probably not, but it's pretty close. And at 6 power, I don't know how to measure if it's an exact 6 power, but I would believe it. And then here at the rear end of the ocular bell, we do have our adjustment to adjust the focus of the reticle to your eye as a shooter, which I actually haven't had to mess with that much. As far as the reticle goes inside, it's going to be a little bit different than the previous ones I've talked about because this is the front focal plane version. So if you're looking at this one compared to some of the other ones, this may seem a little less busy. There's a little bit less going on, and that is because the reticle has to be usable all the way from 1 power and up to 6 power. And I guess in case you're not aware of what the difference between a front focal plane and a second focal plane reticle is, the second focal plane reticle, no matter what magnification you're on, that reticle is going to look exactly the same, which usually means the holdovers, if it has them, is only correct at maximum magnification. With a front focal plane, that reticle grows and shrinks with the magnification, so those holdovers are going to be correct regardless of the magnification you have on it. But that also means that a reticle that looks nice and big at 6 power looks really small at 1 power. So let's go ahead and dive a little bit into the reticle. So for your center aiming point, you have a chevron, which I really like, especially when you compare it to some of the old models of the second focal plane 1-6s from Primary Arms, which had a circle. A circle is really hard, at least for me, to get a very consistent point of aim every single time, and my groups, I feel comfortable saying, could suffer as a result of that. With the chevron, you have an infinitely fine point that you can use to make much more precise points of aim, which can keep groups nice and small, at least potentially. With this rifle, using the ammo that I've been mostly running through this, the 55 grain Frontier ammo, I'm consistently getting right around 1.25" group 5-shot groups at 100 yards. I'm more than okay with that, and I feel comfortable saying that that is pretty good for me, so I'm definitely happy with the way this thing is set up currently. But with that chevron, you also have a kind of Christmas tree down below that, which has your holdovers from 300 all the way out to 600 yards, along with the wind holds at both of those, or all of those distances as well. And then encircling the whole thing is a big horseshoe, which works really well to make this thing usable at 1 power, because at 1 power, that chevron and Christmas tree shrank real small, and having that big horseshoe basically, I don't want to say makes it treated like a red dot because it's bigger than your standard 2 MOA red dot, but it gives you a much faster sight picture than you would otherwise have with just that, chevron and tree alone. Now, even without some of the extra ranging features that the second focal plane ones have, this does still have ranging features if you want to use them, and because it's front focal plane, you can use those features at any magnification. So for example, with the 300 down to the 600, It's going to be shoulder to shoulder on a man-sized target, and if I remember correctly, the inside of the chevron or the horseshoe is shoulder to shoulder at 100 yards. So real still good ranging features in there. It's just not quite as robust of a ranging reticle as the second focal plane versions. We'll kind of get into my thoughts about whether I like the front focal plane or second focal plane better a little bit later in the video. But let me go ahead and talk to you about what my experience has been with this reticle overall. So obviously I've done quite a bit of shooting with it, but the thing I wanted to do prior to actually giving you my opinions on it is run this thing through an actual class to see how it performs under a more, I guess, practical environment than just shooting off a bench on a square range out to at most 290 yards, which this thing is more than capable of giving me good precise targets at those distances. But I took this thing through it was actually probably a month and a half ago, almost 2 months ago. I took this thing through a precision rifle class hosted by Spartan Training Concepts, and that gave me the opportunity to shoot this in a bunch of different positions at a bunch of different types of targets out to, again, only about 300 yards. And I know that's going to be pretty short for most of you out there. However, welcome to the Willamette Valley of Oregon. It's pretty close quarters here. Maybe sometime in the future I'll be in a place where I can shoot out to 600 yards, but that is not now. So anyway, during that class, it really strained my abilities both as a shooter, but then also what the setup that I personally have is. I definitely found some failure points, some things that I wanted to change around after that class just to improve my odds of hitting what I'm shooting at. But that being said, I still felt that this all performed very, very well. So what kind of things were we doing in that class? Well, first of all, you can watch the dedicated video I have on that class, but you know, we're a lot of what we were doing, again, not being a very long distance class, was very, very precise shooting. So usually, like, so for example, one of the courses of fire, we had little 3x5 note cards with Sharpied faces drawn onto them with different facial features, and the instructor would give us the description of our target, and then we would have to get into position, look at each of like the 10 or so different possible targets, pick ours out, and make a shot on that target. Those of us with at least 6 power magnification scopes were able to do that reasonably well. I'm not going to lie, it was kind of tough, but I was able to still discern what I needed to with the 6 power at the distance we were shooting. People running 1-4s or the fold-over 3x magnifiers had to actually move considerably closer to be able to make out their targets. So really, really like having at least 6 power magnification on my low power variable optics. But I'm not going to tell you this is the clearest glass in the world, but when we were shooting, the farthest shots we were doing was about 280 yards onto a hostage-style target with swingers in the middle of it. If I'm guesstimating here, but I want to say the circles were about 3 inches that we had to make our shots into, and the swingers themselves were painted yellow to match the fall leaves of everything around it, so it was really hard to pick it out. And I'll actually roll in some footage of what that looked like, not from when I was shooting it, but well, maybe it was when I was shooting it. Anyway, I'll annotate it in the video. I was still able to confidently engage those targets accurately, get it into those targets on the swingers at, again, almost 300 yards, 280-ish yards with this reticle. Anything past that, it's going to be pretty hard with only 6 power, but can definitely still be done, especially onto man-sized targets well beyond that distance. But when you're trying to get it into like a 3-inch circle, it was definitely, when you're trying to get it into a 3-inch circle, you're definitely kind of pushing it with the 6 power magnification. So all in all, I really felt a lot of confidence in this scope after that class. Is it the most strenuous class in the world? No. Was it the highest round count in the world? Definitely not. But with the types of shooting I was doing, this reticle performed, and this scope as a whole performed very, very well in conjunction with the rest of the rifle. Now, so I really like it. What do I think about this compared to a second focal plane reticle from Primary Arms? It's one of those things where I think if you ask me a week from now, I might have a different answer, but I think I might actually prefer the second focal plane more. And let me try to articulate why, at least at this point in time, I feel that way as our lighting is beginning to fade. So, my view of a low power variable optic is on a fighting rifle like this Midwest Industries rifle. I want to be able to own anything between 0 and, let's say, 400 yards. Confidently, I can make sure that I know exactly where my shot's going to go at anything between 0 and 400 yards. Odds are, in a fighting context, if I'm engaging anything within 200 yards, it's pretty much going to be just a dead hold, center hold, and depending on where you zero this, if you zero it according to their recommendations, you're probably going to be either 2.5 inches low or 2.5 inches high between 0 and probably 250 yards. So I don't need that reticle to grow and shrink with me because it's just going to be a dead hold at that point. If I'm engaging something 300 or beyond, that's when I'm probably going to need those ranging features. And at that point, I'm going to be at 6 times magnification anyway. If I'm engaging a target that far away, odds are I have enough time to go from 1 power all the way up to 6 power, or whatever magnification I was on before, up to 6 power. So because of that, I'm only really going to be using those ranging features at max power. So I'd rather have a more robust reticle to do that at that magnification. Again, you give up some of the robustness of the ranging with the front focal plane because it still has to be usable so small. And with that, I feel as though it's easier to pick up a fast sight picture without illumination. We're kind of assuming no illumination here, and I'll tell you why momentarily. But without illumination, for me, it was easier to pick up the reticle of the second focal plane at 1 power than the front focal plane at 1 power. Now, you can use illumination, and that does help significantly. However, even though this goes all the way to 11, by my definition, I would not say that this thing is daylight bright. In bright sunlight, I could see kind of an amberish glow, kind of a reddish glow, but not anything that I would really call daylight bright. It wasn't really jumping out. Now, maybe that's battery was partly used at that point or whatever other explanation you want to have, but for me, it could be brighter. So in a pure daylight scenario, if you have a bunch of high contrast stuff going on, you might have a harder time picking up that reticle, especially at 1 power. Now, if you're on a square range shooting at very high contrast targets and you have a very blank background with your berm behind it, it's going to be pretty easy to pick up that reticle. But in a more practical environment, especially with trees and branches and everything else, it's going to be really hard to pick up that reticle, and that only gets exacerbated like right now when we're about 15-20 minutes before sundown and it's getting gray, it's getting dark. It's going to be really hard to pick up that reticle quickly without a whole bunch of practice at that 1 power. Now at 6 power, it's great, but at 1 power, you're really sacrificing speed on that reticle. Now maybe you have other sighting options that will kind of eliminate that need, like an offset red dot or offset iron sights that you would use close up. But for me, I kind of am leaning towards that second focal plane. Now, that being said, like I said, I already really like this reticle. I'm more than fine with it, but I think if I were to pick again in the future, unless something crazy happens, in my opinion, between now and then, I would kind of personally lean towards the second focal plane. Not to mention the second focal planes are actually cheaper. So depending on what type of shooting you're doing, if you really, really like having the ability to range at whatever magnification you're on, if you anticipate going between different distance targets really, really quickly, front focal plane is awesome. It's a really, really great reticle, and it's a really good optic for that. For my purposes, I'm kind of leaning towards the second focal plane. But again, if you want a front focal plane, I heartily recommend this option, especially at the price point. So let's talk about that. I believe right now these are around $400. I could be wrong. I'll put the actual retail price on the screen right now, but I believe these are around $400. That puts it pretty dead center into a lot of other competitive options out there. However, like I've said in every one of my ACSS reticle reviews, I think no matter what price range we're talking about, I think the ACSS reticles are the best on the market. I really genuinely believe that the designs that Dimitri is doing beat just about anything else out there. And the fact that you even have companies like Trigicon putting ACSS reticles and their ACOGs should probably tell you that he's doing really good work, and I really like these reticles. So even if I'm gonna get slightly better glass quality or slightly better edge-to-edge quality in some other brand at a very similar price, which I don't think you will, but assuming you could, the fact that this has the ACSS reticle alone puts this above it pretty much every time. And I'm glad to see that since the last time I reviewed a primary arms optic, they've expanded their optics lineup quite a bit. A lot more long scopes, a lot more just kind of different options, including ACSS reticles for 6.5 Creedmoor, which I know is going to be popular with a lot of people out there. Now, if you're like me, you watch a lot of Grantham videos, and you've probably seen his torture test on one of these. I think that it actually held up exceptionally well, especially when you see how it did on the Scar 17. Scar 17's chew-through optics, and the fact that one of these held up well under that context is really impressive, and I think speaks to the quality that these optics come in at, even at their more budget-friendly price range. So I want to go ahead and try to sum up here again as things are getting darker and things are getting louder here at the range again. If you're looking for a really good value optic, primary arms just in general is a really safe bet. I really like everything that I've used from them. I have plenty of reviews on this channel if you want to search out the other ones. And I'm probably going to be picking up another one of their scopes for a long-range precision series that I'm hoping to start around the first of the year. In fact, I was doing some finagling with that here today. So anyway, I want to go ahead and say thank you to all my patrons for making videos like this one possible. While primary arms did provide the optic, my patrons allowed me to be able to purchase the ammo, to be able to take a class like the one I did and put a lot of rounds through this thing along with the rest of this rifle. So because of that, I post all my content over there early. I do also do some exclusive content over there. We do live streams. We do have a Discord server. So if any of that sounds interesting, definitely head over to my Patreon and become a supporter. But anyway, with all that being said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching. Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a video talking to you about this optic. Literally as soon as I start. It's been quiet. Totally quiet. As soon as I start talking, that happens. The reticle in this is going to be obviously different, being a front focal plane, than the other ones that I've reviewed in the past. So the reticle on this, one of the other drills we did was shooting onto little 3x5 little 3x5 index cards with little faces drawn on them, and basically the instructor would give us a description of a face, and we had to pick out of a lineup of about 10. We had to pick out of a lineup of about 10 different targets which one was ours based on the description of the we had to pick out which one was ours out of a series of about 10 based on those. We had to pick out of a lineup of about 10 different targets which one was ours simply based on those facial features, and they were drawn on with Sharpie, so it was really hard to tell, but again, but I did feel comfortable doing it with this, whereas the people who were running either there was literally no one here when I showed up. Now I did